Want a chance to win a Spring Creek Model Train's 25th anniversary car? Sign up for their newsletter before December 15th for your chance to win each week. The Spring Creek Model Train's newsletter includes new product announcements, pre-order information, specials, coupons, and more. With drawings held each week, the sooner you sign up, the more chances you have to win. Head to the bottom of the homepage at springcreekmodeltrains.com and sign up for your chance to win. Fast forward into the future or bring a touch of the past to your layout with Rapido GP20 tank cars from Home Shops. Deliver clean and safe water to areas in critical need, just like the prototype with water-trained tank cars. These models represent a new, innovative solution to help solve water shortages across North America. Also available from Home Shops, Gargle Oil GP20 tank cars. This industry was a cornerstone of Frank Ellison's Delta lines, and these cars feature a classic 1970s look that pays tribute to the legacy of this inspiring freelance layout. Learn more about these cars and see the entire Home Shops catalog at homeshops.net. Trainfest 2025 is almost here, and Tully models will be there. Make your way to Milwaukee November 1st and 2nd, then head to the Craftsman Courtyard in the Baird Center. There you'll find demonstrations and clinics featuring the Tully Models brands, including Industrial Modeler Supply and Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply, plus two big announcements you won't want to miss. Come see for yourself how Tully Models can help bring more realism to your layout industries. Learn more about Tully Models at Trainfest 2025 at tullymodels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on this episode, coming to us from Dayton, Ohio, Brent Johnson. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. Glad to be here.
Good to have you here, and a guy who has graced the cover of Railroad Model Craftsman back in November 2023. Probably feels like yesterday to you. It was I guess closing in on the 2-year anniversary of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing experience to be on a magazine like RMC, so.
Oh, I could only imagine. I mean, and not only to be able to submit an article, and you wrote the article yourself, and I think you did the photos for it as well, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
That must have been a fun experience to be able to share your layout like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The editor of RMC, Otto Vondrak, I mean, great guy, worked with me. You know, we emailed back and forth to get the article right and additional photos, and it was a great experience.
Did you know you were going to have the cover when it came out?
He did ask me to photograph some potential cover photos, so I thought there was a good opportunity that I'd make the covers.
But you didn't know exactly for sure. It was kind of, you still got that moment of surprise when you got to see it?
I didn't know a little bit ahead of time. I can't remember how far ahead of time, but he did send me a proof of it, of the article and the cover beforehand, so I could just make some, go over it one more time. But so I did know. It wasn't a complete surprise when I got it in the mail.
Okay, so you kind of knew, but still, the fact that you got the cover of RMC, being able to share your layout with so many readers, and RMC is, to me, the leading magazine in the industry right now. So what a thrill for you to be able to be a part of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, they are definitely one step or more above the competition. I mean, they're doing a great job over there.
Yeah, I was using that article to do a little prep for tonight, get to know you a little bit. We're going to let our listeners get to know you quite a bit tonight as we go along with your journey that led you to modeling the Clinchfield Railroad Carolina Division. Looking forward to diving into that. But why don't we start kind of in the beginning before all of this and kind of your introduction to the Clinchfield Railroad. Tell us a bit about that.
So, yeah, I'll even go back a little further. So my aunt and uncle had a house that was probably a couple hundred feet away from the main line of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad in Harlan, Kentucky. And, at the time, so this would have been the tail end of the L&N era before the Seaboard System merger in the early 80s. And, it was coal train after coal train. And it was, every time I heard the horn go off of the grade crossing, I'd run out to the porch and watch the coal trains go by. And I had a cousin who was an engineer for the L&N, and they had a yard a couple miles down from my aunt's house. And it had to be a holiday because I think the mines were shut down because there was nobody else there. And, we got up in the cab of a GP38-2 and he let me sit at the control stand and kind of ran it back and forth a little bit in the yard. And I think that's probably what made me a bona fide train nut at that point. But then, fast forward a couple years, I had heard about the Clinchfield, but it wasn't until I was rummaging around in a buddy's closet and his dad had some RMCs, Railroad Model Craftsmen, from the 1970s that were still in the cellophane wrapper. And there was an article in the November and December 1976 RMC. The first one was by David DeVault, and the second article was Jim Boyd and Tony Coaster wrote it. And it was about the Clinchfield. And it was like, man, this is an amazing little railroad. It was a Class 1 railroad, but it was only 277 miles from, end to end. And they hauled a lot of coal, but it was a bridge route. So they had a lot of merchandise as well. And I thought, man, this is a really neat railroad. And then a couple years later, I got a hold of a book by Steve King called Clinchfield Country. And that was an all color book. And it was just amazing. Just the photos. And I already liked Appalachian railroading with my love for the L&N and the Clinchfield. Just, I liked it. I liked it better just because it was just, it wasn't a huge railroad. So it felt like a regional. So it wasn't as mighty as the L&N. And also, it happened to be a subsidiary of the L&N and the Seaboard Coastline. So I felt like it was all in the family.
Well, I would think, that's kind of interesting that after that kind of experience and that access with the L&N, I figured you'd be a lifelong fan and just completely dedicated to them. But I guess you don't feel like you've cheated on them too much when you start to model a subsidiary of them.
Right. And I get to run L&N power on the Clinchfield. But I knew at a young age I wanted to grow up and model a prototype model railroad. And it was either going to be the L&N or the Clinchfield. I really hadn't ruled out the L&N until a couple of years before I started building the current layout I was on. But, when it came down to planning everything, the Clinchfield, I'd accumulated a lot more knowledge about it. And it just seemed like a perfect railroad to model.
What set that prototype mentality so early? What was the influence there?
I don't know. So this would have been, as early as, the 80s and early 90s. And Dayton, Ohio was a hotbed of model railroading in the 70s and 80s and then into the 90s. And, we had guys like Alan McClelland and Don Santel and all these guys were modeling these proto freelance railroads and doing it well. But, I wanted to model real railroad and I wanted to do it accurately. And I knew that, from a young age, I had ordered at I was probably 14 or 15. I ordered these USGS topographical maps of the entire L&N Cumberland Valley subdivision so I could map it out. I knew that was something I was going to do at some point.
Yeah, that's early on influence in heading in that prototype mentality. And you mentioned quite the Alan McClellan influence, but Alan McClellan was a freelance guy. So what was really inspiring this prototype stuff? What are you seeing around you that was really kind of lighting you up about prototype?
I guess I should say everybody in the area seemed like they were doing freelancing, and I wanted to do something different. So I don't know if that's what spurred it on or just the fact that I really liked these railroads that I don't think I could have freelanced something I would have liked any better than the actual prototypes.
So prototyping as a rebellion?
Maybe. In this day and age, there's a lot of models that model prototypes. It's not that rebellious now, but maybe back then it seemed like a lot of guys were freelancing.
Did you have, when you mentioned these trips to your aunt and uncles to the L&N and, I imagine you were probably, very young, right? Within preteen age, kind of seeing the L&N. Was that about the right age or was it sooner?
So to show my age, I'm under 50. So the L&N.
Me too.
Was in it. Yeah. So the L&N was nearing the end when I remember it, but that turned into CSX eventually. And so I caught the tail end of the L&N. I barely remember the gray and yellow engines before they were patched out. one day I went to my aunt's house and I'm seeing like these CSX engines, and I can't remember what happened between then. I know there was a Seaboard system, but I feel like they must have kept a lot of L&N engines around Harlan, Kentucky, because there was a time frame where I don't recall Seaboard till I saw them patched in CSX paint. Even though that I only saw the L&N for a couple years before it was merged into the other railroads, that was still a very strong memory of mine.
When did you start to get an understanding of what that all meant, like the Louisville and Nashville and the CSX? And did you immediately start by seeing those railroads? And then as a kid, kind of like, you dated yourself enough to say it was pre-internet. Where did you start to learn about these railroads and dive in a little bit more?
The only thing I knew up to that point was what I saw. And then about the time Clinchfield Country book came out, Ron Flannery wrote a book called The L&N and the Appalachians, which was an all-color book on all the L&N divisions. And that's where I really learned about the L&N. And this was in the CSX era at that point. But that was a great time to railfan CSX in the late 80s into the 90s, because you could catch an L&N engine, you could catch a Family Lines engine. I wish I had a digital camera back then or a cell phone, because I missed a lot.
Don't we all, right? Yeah. It was like catching heritage units before there was even such a thing called the heritage unit.
Exactly. My dad and I used to golf, and there was a golf course right on the main line, CSX main line through Dayton. And man, I loved going just to watch the trains, because you could hear them coming, and sometimes you catch an L&N, you'd catch a Seaboard Coastline unit. That was a great time.
So we talk about this prototype stuff, but how about modeling? When did that start to come into your life?
So my first train set was an HO scale Bachmann. It was a pine saw special, like the cleaner pine saw. It had like an F7 that was green and yellow with the pine saw logo. It had a pine saw boxcar and caboose, and it had a Rock Island hopper car. So I don't know if it was some kind of gimmick or something. Maybe.
You mean you never saw a prototype of pine saw?
No, I did
trains
not.
Anywhere? No.
No. That's what started it, and I modeled HO for a number of years. Switched to N scale for a while, which I heard you're interested in.
Well, that's a whole other podcast.
And then eventually went back to HO, but some of my early attempts were not great, But I always had, even at an early age, I always had an operations inkling, because I would try to switch cars into industries and stuff. So I always felt there was something more than just running the trains around a 4x8.
And that's probably maybe a little premature, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like early on, you had an idea of operations, which usually takes a little bit longer for most people.
Yeah, I knew that trains, drop cars off and picked them up at industries, and that's about all I knew. And I tried to do that. As a kid, I had a 4x8 sheet of Homasote, which is amazing. My dad got a sheet of Homasote for me to build my layout on, which was great, because you could spike the track down, you could take it up and then respike it somewhere else in another arrangement. But I learned about operations from watching. Do you remember there was a PBS had a show called Tracks Ahead in the early 90s, I think.
I must have missed that one. Well, yeah, but tell us about it.
I recorded it on VHS, every episode. In the first episode, there was a segment with Andy Sparandio where he talked about an operating session on Model Railroaders MR&T layout. And they showed an operating session. He was dispatching, and they interviewed people. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is, what you can do with a model railroad. So after seeing that video, I realized there's a lot more, to model railroading. And
there's purpose, right?
Yeah, there's purpose. And I'm like, I want to be that guy that's switching this train at this industry and talking to a dispatcher on the radio. I thought that's pretty cool stuff.
How long did the 4x8 layout with the pine saw train last?
I had that till I switched to N scale, and I wish I would have kept it. I ended up selling all my HO stuff at a garage sale, and I switched to N scale after I got a copy of Model Railroader. It was in 1990. I can't remember the month, but it had Bill and Wayne Reed's Cumberland Valley Division on it. It was an N scale layout with Western Maryland, Pennsylvania. It was awesome. I mean, I'm like, this is N scale. I mean, it was a beautiful layout, and I'm like, well, if I can do that, something like that in N scale, I can do a lot more in a smaller space. So I'm selling all my HO stuff, and I'm switching to N. And once again, my N scale started off with a Bachmann train set, and it went from there. And I did that for a number of years.
These books and magazines are highly influential on you. You've
They
got
are.
a lot. They've walked you down a path a couple of times.
Well, this was pre-internet, so that's all you had. That issue of Model Railroad or RMC that came every month was like Christmas. It was just getting that in the mail and seeing all these layouts and all the back then they had pages and pages of stuff you could buy too. So mail order, and so that was. I miss those days to some degree. I mean, the internet's great. It's definitely brought another level to the hobby, but those were fun times though, getting that magazine.
Well, even with the internet, I still think that we're all seeking reliable sources, right? And sometimes you wonder on the internet, are we getting the most reliable source? But when that print shows up in your mailbox or that digital copy shows up on your phone, it's almost like gospel, right? You know that you're getting the right information.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time it takes, because in addition to the RMC article, I wrote in Model Railroad, I probably had 3 or 4 how-to articles in the 2010s. And the time it takes to do that is, I don't know, anybody that's never written an article for a magazine in with step-by-step and photographs, I don't think they understand, how much effort that takes to do. So I respect those guys and gals that are writing articles and print magazines versus, posting a photo on Facebook or something, because it takes a lot of work and time to do. And that's why I haven't done it since November of 23, because I have a lot of layout to build. So I haven't taken the time to write anything.
It does take time, but it's almost like a vetting process too, isn't it? By having somebody having to go through that process versus, like you said, just throwing the picture up and throwing some text up. They got to walk down that path, and it kind of filters it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome stuff. So you have a 4x8 HO layout. You sell that. You get this N scale set. What do you do with the N scale set?
So after that article in MR on Bill and Wayne Reed's layout, I became a Pensy fan all of a sudden. So and I also couldn't airbrush at the time. The Pensy, I like second generation diesels, so it was a lot easier to paint on, paint Brunswick green and decal a couple little heralds onto the late 60s Pensy diesels than it was trying to decal. I tried doing an N scale CSX when they came out with the second yellow nose scheme, that didn't turn out well. So I thought, I'm just going to model Pensy because engines are a lot easier to paint. So, and I built various layouts in my parents' basements in N scale, and I thought they were okay at the time, but looking back, they weren't very good. So
we all start
a learning
somewhere.
experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
nobody was born with a master model railroader on their birth certificate.
I definitely was not one of those. So
right.
But it was a learning process.
So you go through the N scale stuff. What's the next step in your model railroading journey?
So I did N scale for a number of years. After I bought my first home in Dayton, I did N scale, and then the hobby, it kind of took a backseat. I did N scale in college for a little bit. There were other interests when I went to college, but I did join a N scale group, Central Ohio N Track, when I lived in Columbus, Ohio. And they had a huge N-track layout that at the time was set up at the Ohio State Fairgrounds. They had a building that they leased out. And So I could go there, after class and run my N-scale equipment. And I did that for a number of years. After college, I had my own house, and I built a layout that didn't run the greatest, and I kind of actually for a while there, I kind of put the hobby on the back seat a little bit. Just, I don't know, lost interest for a little bit. There was maybe like an 8-month period where I stopped a subscription to a magazine, Model Railroader, and just took a little backseat for a while, as we all do.
Kind of full stop there. What got that flywheel turning again? What got you back into the hobby?
I can't recall what got the bug bit again, but I switched to HO scale, and it really might have been there was a Yahoo group called the Clinchfield group, which is now a Groups.io, and it was very active. This was probably the early 2000s. And I joined that group, and there was just so much information on the Clinchfield. And I kind of got bit by the prototype bug again. I got married, and I started collecting HO. And I debated on L&N or Clinchfield, but when it came down to it, there wasn't a good, at the time, this is mid, I don't know, 2000. I married in 2008, but I met my wife a couple years before that. And there wasn't a lot of prototypically accurate L&N hoppers at the time for the 1970s. Tangent would fix that problem later on. But the backbone of Clinchfield's hopper fleet was the 14-panel hopper, which Bowser and Stewart made. So I decided that's really what set me on the path for the Clinchfield. I'm like, well, they have an accurate hoppers. Atlas had the twin bay hoppers. I can do an accurate hopper fleet. And I actually, along with the Yahoo group, I coordinated with some other members to have a custom run of hoppers made by Bowser. So I had 5 massive boxes dropped off by UPS at my house with thousands of hoppers. We had an order for I think I bought a couple hundred, and then we had, maybe 1,500 hoppers that guys ordered off this group. And so I handled the orders and ended up ship them out to the rest of the group members. That started my hopper fleet of Clinchfield hoppers by doing this custom run of Bowser's.
I want to kind of recap all this because this is kind of interesting to me. As a young kid, you get the chance to be in the cab of an L&N locomotive, which I think would have just permanently wrote in my mind that I love the L&N forever and I'm loyal forever, yeah. Right? And that'd be my road. And then you went down a couple different paths. You saw the Clinchfield, and then you dabbled a little bit with Pensy because perhaps it was a little easier to paint and it was easy for you. But ultimately, and through these books and all this other influence, you talk about Clinchfield Country with Steve King. You talk about all this other literature that you got where you were learning this. But through all of that, it comes down to just availability of hoppers that point you on the path.
That was probably one of the big reasons, just prototypical accuracy. And, I still love the L&N. I do. That's still one of my top roads. But I knew with the Clinchfield, I'd get to model the L&N too. So the Clinchfield hauled a lot of hoppers a lot of coal trains for the L&N. They use pool power with L&N engines. And so I knew I could still get my L&N satisfaction by modeling the Clinchfield. But yeah, I guess when I never thought about it like that, but yeah, it did come down to availability of hoppers, I guess.
It's telling me that's how important prototypical accuracy is for you, that you'll decide a railroad based on what you could accurately prototype model.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. And, and I actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those Bowser hoppers, but they, have molded on ladders and grab irons. I sat, in our kitchen and cut off all those grab irons and put 3-dimensional wire grab irons and all this on 200 cars. I was nuts.
Yeah, you were dedicated. Yeah, I won't call you nuts, but I'll definitely call you dedicated. Yeah,
but they look great today. I don't have time for that kind of stuff nowadays. But yeah, I'm glad I did it.
I think pre-layout, we're all got plenty of time, and I'm kind of in between layouts. So I'm finding that same thing, and I'm sure that's what you were finding as well, right? You were able to get that kind of stuff done before the layout.
Yeah, sure. I mean, our first home, we didn't have a basement or anything, and that's basically what I did. I built rolling stock, locomotives, painted, weathered, did all that stuff till we had a bigger home.
What would you say the biggest thing that you learned in the process pre-layout, as far as all of that kind of stuff, the painting and everything else? What were some of the bigger lessons you learned there?
That I wasn't the best at weathering at first, but it was enjoyable. I really enjoyed that time, because getting to sit there and, actually do some modeling where you're detailing equipment was a lot. It was fun, and it was relaxing, and I didn't have a lot of pressure, because I wasn't building a layout. I didn't have any other projects going on, so it just it was an enjoyable time for me in the hobby, actually.
No distractions.
Right, correct.
Yeah,
I have plenty now.
I'm sure you do.
We'll get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will. So first house, you've got something in the basement though, right? I think you said you had no basement.
This would be so. After my wife and I got married, we moved into her house, so we didn't have a basement in that house.
So your first house had a basement.
My first house did, and that was when I was on my own. I started my career, and I bought a house in East Dayton, and it had a basement. But once we decided to get married, we went down to one house and tried selling a house after the 2008 crash in East Dayton. It wasn't pretty, but
so the sacrifices you make for the marriage, right? You give up your railroad basement and move in with her. So that gives you time to get all this other stuff done, and change and put grab irons on hoppers and weather and learn all these skills. When do you decide I got to have a basement?
Yeah. So, after we got married, we, after a couple of years, decided to look for a house. I knew what I wanted. She knew what she wanted. She wanted a house in the country. I wanted a basement, a large basement, as we all do,
Yeah.
So it took us 3 years to find that house.
Wow.
There was several that I nixed that she liked because the basement, wasn't suitable. And we actually put a bid on a house that had a bigger basement than what I have now, and lost the bid. But it took us a while to get it just right, and I did find a house with a large unfinished basement, and that's when the layout planning began.
As you're doing this house shopping, did you kind of have an idea in your head, like what size, or did you kind of have a plan of sorts of what you wanted for a layout for this new home?
I knew that I wanted a large, preferably unfinished basement. I didn't want a basement that had already been finished and divided off by rooms. And I wanted it dry, and, a decent, not a low ceiling or anything. But it really came down to size, and, not having too many obstructions to work around.
So as you purchased the house and now you've got a basement, let's take a step back a little bit, and let's talk about, we know because of the article, and we mentioned before that it's the Clinchfield Railroad, it's the Carolina Division. Let's talk a bit about the Carolina Division and how you came to deciding that what you were going to model was the Carolina Division.
So the Clinchfield itself did not divide itself into divisions. Now the Carolina Division is the name, what I named my railroad. So there isn't actually a Carolina Division.
Okay.
But the Clinchfield is divided in half at Erwin, Tennessee, which is the headquarters. It's often just called, you got the north end of the railroad and the south end of the railroad. And the north end is dominated by coal. That's where the online coal mines are. There's a lot of industry in Kingsport and Johnson City that's non-coal, but the north end is basically dominated by coal. The south end, starts off in the Blue Ridge Mountains and ends up in the Piedmont area of North and South Carolina. And I knew, there was a couple other models that were doing a great job modeling the north end at the time. So I thought, well, I initially thought about modeling like Kingsport, Johnson City, because all the industries, but then I ended up settling on the south end. And when it came to, I wanted to come up with a name for my railroad, just so I didn't want to calling it the Clinchfield South End just didn't flow.
Right.
So most of the south end of the railroad's in the Carolinas. A little bit of it's in Tennessee, but most of it's in North Carolina and South Carolina. So I came up with Carolina Division just it flowed better than just calling it the south end of the Clinchfield.
So I would agree. So Carolina Division sounds better than South End. At least you know where it is, right?
They could have got, they just chose not to call it the Carolina Division. They could have, but in my world, they did. So
there you go. A little artistic license.
Yeah.
And for a prototype guy, that's a lot of artistic license, maybe. But yeah, that's good. That's good. So when you start learning about the South End, what you're going to call the Carolina Division, what are the things that you learn about it, and then the things that you definitely know have got to be a part of a layout that you're building?
The South End has a lot of scenes that beg to be modeled, in my opinion. There's just the northern part of the South End is dominated by feldspar mines and mica mines that are get covered hoppers, and there's they look almost like grain elevators because they have silos, but they're not, and they ship feldspar, which is a white powdery substance, sand-like. And then you go a little bit further south from that, you have towns like Marion, North Carolina, that has an interchange with the Southern Railroad, and it's got several little industries there that can be modeled. There's a yard at Bostic, North Carolina, that had major interchange with the seaboard, and beyond that, there's just a variety of industries that, modeling the north end of the railroad, it originally considered that, but, I wanted to model more than coal and more than, the occasional through train of freight traffic. So one famous area of the Clinchfield is the loops, where it goes through numerous tunnels. The railroad doubles back on itself. It's a beautiful area. It's famous, but I couldn't fit that in. The loops, as gorgeous as the loops are, and as cool as it would see a model of it, it does nothing to add to the operation of the railroad. It would take up a lot of real estate in the basement, but it's already past the helper district, so I couldn't even model pushers on that part of the railroad. And there's no online industry on the loop, so that's something I left out. I wanted to hit some of the well-known scenes that you see in the books and the magazines, all the Clinchfield books. There's certain scenes that every Clinchfield fan knows, and I wanted to model those scenes, but I wanted the railroad to be fun to operate too. So.
For the prototype modeler that you are, and the steps that you've taken, how difficult was it to cut the loops out, or to make those edits to the layout that would leave some scenes like that on the really on the editing room floor?
As large of a space as I have, which it's 31 by 51, I think, last count, and it's double deck, so I got a lot of mainline run. Even with that, modeling 150 so miles of railroad, you still have to edit it down a bit.
Right.
So I had to ask myself, is this part of the railroad important to the operations? If I leave it out, will it affect train operations when it comes time to operate? And the loops, that hit the cutting floor. I couldn't model every passing siding on the south end. So if it was a siding that didn't have any online business on it, it was might have hit the cutting room floor. So
yeah, well, compression definitely is a world of sacrifices, isn't it?
It is. And even with as large a space as I have, you still have to compress it. I mean, I originally, when I considered modeling the Kingsport, Tennessee, Johnson, Tennessee area, would be great for a switching layout. I mean, there's a ton of industry, at least back in the 70s, but to model Kingsport, Tennessee accurately, which had 2 classification yards, had a TOFC yard, it took almost the entire bottom deck. And I didn't want to dominate that much area to one town. So when I looked at the south end, I could have a lot of green space between industries, and that was important to me as well. I didn't want, a bunch of a spaghetti bullet track.
I've heard that theory before, that a scene in compression will in sense, ruin it. So you don't want to include it because it's not really doing it justice. And it sounds like you may have done that for a few of yours.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that I'm, not getting, one-to-one on in certain scenes. So I do have to even compress some of the scenes that I model.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think if you do compress it too much, it could have an effect on what you're trying to do if you're trying to be prototypically accurate. But sometimes even just getting it close enough works. And I feel like I've done that on some things. I did not want to get tied down with all the nuances of every little scene because I never get done with this layout. I mean, there's compromises I've had to make. Like there's a large industry in North Cove, North Carolina, that receives insulated boxcars, but where it was on the prototype, it would have been against the aisle, and I wouldn't want a large industry, somebody trying to switch that into the aisle, and there'd be, no way to really model a factory like that. With a lot of my scenes are only 18 inches deep. So that's a compromise I made, was flipping that to the opposite side of the tracks. So when I photograph that scene, if somebody's, really knowledgeable on that area of the Clinchfield, they may say, well, that's on the wrong side of the tracks, or, well, yeah, it is. But, sometimes we have to make compromises in the model world.
And in that, you're actually willing to make those sacrifices with a operations mindset, even though you do have that prototype mentality. You're willing to do what's best for the operations on your layout.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because that's, as you talked about, how operations are the icing on the cake. And I think that's definitely a factor in how I design my layout, for sure.
So let's talk about starting this project now. 31 by 51 space. That's a pretty sizable space. You've got this plan for a double deck layout. Talk about diving into this thing and starting to lay this out.
Yeah. So shortly after we bought the house, I started, planning the layout, and I planned for a couple of years before I even started, but I knew that I hadn't built a decent layout before this. So, and I was a lone wolf modeler at the time too. So I really hadn't been involved in NMRI for a number of years, and I really didn't know a whole lot of people in the hobby. So it was kind of one of those things. I knew if I built it and I built it right and operationally well, if I build it, they will come, So, but I knew I had to get it right. I didn't want to start building a large layout and then have to tear it down a couple years later because it ran like crap or it looked like crap. So before I even started a piece of bench work on this layout, I wanted to build a layout to completion, like from bench work to scenery. So Model Railroader magazine had a project layout a few years back called the Virginian, and they had it in the magazine, but they also had how-to videos. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to build this 4x8 Virginian layout exactly like they showed in the magazine and the videos, because before I start this large Clinchfield layout, I want to show myself that I can actually complete something that runs and operates and looks decent, because I didn't want to have to start on this thing and, like every other layout I built, it looks and runs like crap, and I end up tearing it down. So that's what I did. I built the Virginian project layout and the 4x8, and it ran and looked great. And the only sad thing is I have the way the stairs go into my basement. Once it was built, I couldn't get it out. So it would have been a great, I would have given it away over having to tear that thing up, but I ended up having, going by way of Sawzall. And so, yeah, I operated that for maybe a year after I got it built. And then I started doing it. I installed a drop ceiling. I did stud walls all around the perimeter of the basement. And then when I settled on my track plan, I did stud walls between the aisles, because that's what I was building my bench work attached to. They were attached to stud walls. So, I mean, this layout could survive a hurricane probably. I mean, it's attached to the the house.
Before we get too far away from it, I'm actually sitting here thinking about the discipline that it required to build that Virginian 4x8, because you got this space that you've been waiting for. And you talked about a 3-year process of buying the house and getting this space. I mean, I think maybe I would just want to go nuts, right? And just start putting bench work up and get this thing going. But you disciplined yourself and you built this layout to eat yourself. That must have taken a world of, like I said, discipline and dedication to get that done. And what lessons did you get out of that? I mean, talk about some of the skills that you were able to build off of this kind of intermediate layout.
So I learned, from track work to electrical, DCC, ballasting scenery, kit bashing. I mean, stuff that I had done before, but I didn't do it very well. I built layouts that, didn't operate the greatest and, barely got into scenery and everything. So, I mean, building that small project layout taught me all the necessary skills I would need to build the current layout I'm building. But I've improved my skills since that Virginian layout, because I'm always learning. You're always, picking up new skills, and the hobby materials get better and the scenery materials improve and everything.
Sure.
But I don't think if I had built that layout, that Virginian layout, I don't think I would have been successful with this one. There's no way.
I just love it because it does back up that theory we've talked about many times on the podcast, that I think some of us, at least I know I have at times, gotten this mentality that the layout now has to be your forever layout. And you knew, I mean, going into it, that the Virginian wasn't even going to be really even a short term. It was just to build it, get it completed, and then you had it, and you knew that you already had the next plan already in mind, but you were disciplined enough. And I think that's so key to know that layout that you're building now, learn as much as you can on it, enjoy it, and know that you can move on from it and go to something completely different and shift gears.
Yeah, it was an investment for sure, because even though I lost, money by having to tear it up, I saved money in the long run by not, building a large layout and then tearing that up. So yeah, it was an investment. It was well worth it.
So let's talk about diving into the Carolina division and your approach here, because I know it wasn't just get this whole thing built. There was a plan and steps to this.
Yeah. Shortly after buying the house, that's when you start putting pencil to paper, and I got the Third Planet track planning software, which I recommend anybody, planning a layout, use some kind of track planning software, just because otherwise you might be trying to put a number 2 turnout in, somewhere, because, on paper, it's easy to, try to cram more than what's allowed in the space. So yeah, I used the track planning software. I got a Clinchfield track diagrams, condensed profile diagrams. The books, the magazines, Google Earth was around by then, which was, it's an amazing tool if you're prototype track planning. And, I designed several track plans. I actually, knowing Tony Custer was a fan of the Clinchfield, I emailed him some of my track plans. And Tony's a great guy. He's, like a model railroad celebrity, but, he answers his email. He doesn't blow you off or anything. So he gave me some good advice, and I read all of Tony's books, so I knew what he's probably going to say. But yeah, he gave me some good advice, and then once I got the ceiling in. I got I had an electrician come in and put a bunch of can lights around the layout, and got the stud walls in. And then I started building.
So talk about this, taking one step at a time as you're starting to build, because I was reading in the article, again, the November 2023 Railroad Model Craftsman article that you wrote. You decided, instead of just trying to do it all in the same phases, that you would start in an area and kind of get that more towards completion. Talk about your thought process there.
Yeah. So I knew I was building this monster and building it by myself, because at the time, like I had mentioned earlier, I was a lone wolf modeler. So I thought, I'm going to suffer model railroad burnout if I, complete all the bench work, complete all the sub road bed, then I move the track, lay all the track, wiring, etc. So I knew, if I did it that way, I'm probably going to get burned out on this project. So I decided I'm going to build from one town to the next. I'm going to start at point A, build to point B, make sure it runs great, do scenery, structures, and then move on to the next. And that's pretty much how I built the entire upper deck of the layout. I did it section by section, and it worked out very well because I'd get a section done, I could operate it. I had scenery, I had, tortoises installed, everything was done. And I, if I got the bug, one day I want to take a break from layout building. I can switch an industry or something. And I didn't get burned out that way. It was like building several small layouts. My layout's huge, okay? But Ray, it's like a shelf layout. I built it like a shelf layout. It's most of the scenes are only 18 inches deep. There's some that are 24. But I took the approach like I'm building this, as several smaller layouts, and that helped me concentrate on each scene, helped me not get bored with it, and it helped me get through almost the upper deck is a layout in itself, just the upper level. That would probably satisfy a lot of modelers, and so I could have been done, after that. I mean, the upper deck's probably 80% scenic. It's there's a few areas I haven't finished, but I mean it's a finished layout basically, and I did that, just completing, going from one town to the next, and now I'm doing the second deck, and I'm kind of not taking that approach. To be honest with you, I'm so into operations right now, the fun of it, that I really want to get the main line done and get to the main yard in Irwin, Tennessee, just because that's totally going to blow operations, off the chain. So I'm motivated to get as much mainline done as I can. Now I am doing some basic scenery shell on the lower deck, just so it's not complete plywood Pacific, but I've kind of thrown my old approach out the window a little bit just to get the mainline done.
It's kind of hit the fast forward button a little bit on the second deck, but I could imagine that the gains from your initial approach of doing one scene at a time to really keep that flywheel turning and give you some gratification, right? That you get to see some kind of end results as well as you're going versus seeing it all in the same phase and not being able to run trains on it and be able to do a little bit of operations kind of keeps that mojo going, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's one downside to that approach in a way, and the downside is when you're building an operating layout, it is a good idea to have some operating sessions, some shakedown sessions without any ballast on the track. Ask me how I know. But I felt comfortable knowing I'm modeling a prototype that if the prototype had this switch here, that's where it's going to be on my layout. If this industry here, that's where it's going to be. So I didn't feel like, I'm going to end up ripping up turnouts or anything. Yeah, there were once we started really operating the layout, there were some tweaks I had to go back and do some of the scenic areas, but it wasn't horrible. But yeah, that is a downside if you don't start operating before you have scenery, that you might have to go back and rip something up. But thankfully, I never had to do any major repairs to the layout. But otherwise, it was a positive experience doing it that way.
You talked about learning from the Virginian layout, but I imagine as you're going through from scene to scene to scene, as you move down the layout, you're starting to learn even more. What's the temptation to come back to the beginning and make changes to that initial scene now that you've developed even more skills as you move down the layout?
Well, it's funny you say that, because the first scene I did is a factory that shipped glucose, and the track arrangement I did on that factory is the CSX era track arrangement. Well, later on, I learned, there was 2 additional tracks than what I modeled, and they operated differently, and they didn't get plastic pellets till the 90s, which I modeled them receiving plastic pellets. So that's one scene I am going to go back eventually.
Here's the prototype
fix.
modeler. He showed up. The prototype modeler showed up.
I'm going to go back, but right now it works. It operates. It's a fun area to operate. But I'm going to go back and fix that. But doing it the way I did though, and I still do this to this day. When I get to the next scene, I focus on learning about that section of the railroad. The track plan that I did, I mean, it's evolved. With each step that I make, I've had to go back and change things because once I get to working in that area and start fitting things, it ends up I see things differently in 3 dimensions, and so it becomes more of an artistic approach once I start working on where the sub road bed's going to go, where how the scene's going to play out. So my track plan is only a guideline, and once I actually get to the next section, I got the laptop next to me. I got Google Earth. There were these cab ride videos that Bob Leone did in the early 90s, and they're a gold mine of information. It was CSX era, but still a lot of the industries were still there. And so I got a DVD player hooked up to my laptop, and I got the cab ride video running with Google Earth, and I'm trying to 3-dimensionally picture these scenes and how I'm going to design them. And it's fun, but it's can be stressful because I'm a perfectionist.
Well, you say something very interesting here too about learning about the layout in sections, where I think in some modelers, they think they got to do all the research in the beginning, learn everything there is to know about the South End, right? Or what you're going to call the Carolina Division, have all that research done, then do the track plan, and then go to it. But you're talking about not only doing scenery in sections, but also learning new things about your layout in sections as well. Kind of, you talk about that one step at a time, or, eating this whole thing one bite at a time. And you're even doing that with the research part in the education about the Clinchfield in that era.
Oh, absolutely. Because, when I designed the track plan initially, I had a macro view of the area. But when I start working on a scene, that's when I narrow my focus down and really try to learn about it, because I'm not from that area. I mean, I've been to the Clinchfield, but I haven't been south of Johnson City, Tennessee. I mean, I just don't have time to go go research, which seems crazy. But once you start having a family, you can't just pack up and go off to North Carolina and start
as much as we'd love to, right? Yeah, it just ain't gonna happen. Yeah, I get it.
So I've had to rely on books, magazines, on internet to do my research for me. And I belong to Facebook pages like if you grew up in North Cove, North Carolina, those places are gold mines for like information. You'll find old photos of the railroad and industries and stuff, and people that worked in these places, and you can find out information. Like I said, when I built that first section layout, I had some misinformation on the one industry, and I learned about it later. So I'm trying not to make that mistake again, but it is what it is. You learn more and you go back, and
that's a great resource. I never really even thought of, using those, like you said, the Facebook groups that, if you're from an X area, because a lot of them share history. And by the way, railroading is a big part of a lot of history of these towns, and people sharing photos or areas. Yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't exist without the railroad. The reason they're there is because of Clinchfield. So.
Right. Yeah. Great resource. So let's talk about where your layout is now. Talk about a little bit about operating it and getting some folks over there to see it. And how do you become not such a lone wolf?
Yeah. So, if there's one positive thing to Facebook and that kind of stuff is meeting other modelers. So, several years back, I initially posted updates on my layout on another Clinchfield modelers page, and then somebody suggested you need to have your own Facebook page. So I did that, and started meeting people as a result of my Facebook page, and I got back into operations. I met Tom Patterson, who has an awesome proto freelance railroad, the Chesapeake Wheeling and Erie. And, I somehow finagled my way into an op session there. And that's how I really got back into operations. And I affectionately think of Tom as, my assistant superintendent of the Clinchfield, because he's, guided so much of how the railroad operates to this day. So, that's how I got out of my cave and started meeting other modelers, and it just blossomed from there. And we started operating on my layout. Say we had some basic operating sessions maybe 3 years ago or so, but it's really taken off in the last couple of years.
What did that do to your motivation for building your layout once you started getting more people involved and meeting Tom Patterson and all these other folks?
It just really upped the ante, because it made me want to motivate me to keep pushing on and really get, like I said, get the mainline golden spike in. I mean, I'm hoping by next year, I got the mainline done for sure. Having friends to share in the hobby and the operations aspect of it. I mean, it's just a hobby within the hobby.
What's your favorite part of model railroading? What is the thing that either scenery or anything? What's your favorite thing to do within the hobby?
My favorite aspect that I get the most enjoyment out of outside of operations is probably scenery. I enjoy trying to recreate a prototypical scene, and the materials that are available today. It's just amazing what can be done. I recently posted on my Facebook page, how Pele Soberg has inspired my scenery. I mean, when he started showing up in the pages of Model Railroader, it was like, whoa, you can do that, on a model railroad.
Yeah.
And so, recreating those scenes, I enjoy doing the weathering locomotives and rolling stock and installing decoders. That's kind of fun. There's so many aspects of the hobby. I could probably name more things I don't enjoy, which is like wiring and bench work and sanding drywall and stuff like that. But getting a finished scene and photographing it and having people who are from the area and familiar with the railroad say, I know where that's at, or that looks just like I remember. I mean, that's great satisfaction.
Those are seal of approval, aren't they? To be able to get that stamp on it that I know where that is. It's amazing for me going to other layouts where it's like, I've been there before and I've stood here before, and it's amazing. And now I can only imagine what that's like for you being a layout owner, and the scenery guy that created those scenes must feel amazing.
It is. It's absolutely. And, I eventually want to have CTC, and I started adding some signals last year. They're not wired to anything. They're just, but they look great.
So you got the scenery part of the signals, but the wiring part, as you mentioned, that's not done yet.
But once CTC is done, I'm waiting till the mainline's done to even really think about that, because there's a passing track I may or may not install. I want to see how the layout operates. I don't see if there's a bottleneck in this one area, whether I need to add a passing track or not. So I don't want to start installing signals and then and get a CTC panel and it be incorrect. But that's a future part of the layout that I don't know if I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to the end game of having lighted signals and a full-fledged CTC panel. I'm not looking forward to figuring out how to make that work.
Well, I'm sure you'll get it figured out one step at a time, like you've done with your entire layout, taking that first step and doing them one step at a time, learning as you go and keeping that flywheel turning. Really great approach. I hope, I mean, I learned a lot about you and what you're doing here with the Carolina division. An absolutely amazing layout that we'll share all the links to, including some images on our website, aroundthelayout.com/184. We'll also share a link to the group, the Clinchfield Railroad Carolina Division Facebook group, where you can learn more and follow Brent's progress as he's creating this masterpiece. And it's a beautiful layout. It's
Thank
one
you.
I got to get myself to Dayton, Ohio, and see in person.
Absolutely. We'll have you down.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Brent, thank you so much for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story.
Hey, appreciate you, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.